Let's talk reality perception. Why is reality perception important? And I would suggest that in the context of every human being wanting to feel sustainably better and wanting to avoid feeling chronically worse, that the reason reality perception is so important is that it allows us, if accurate, to predict the future. And that because the future is spherical, because the future has a possibility field and a probability field that is both positive and negative, meaning that the future, if it goes one way, moves closer to feeling sustainably good. And if it goes another way, moves closer to feeling chronically bad. That the fact that the spherical possibility field is spherical, it goes out in all directions, positively and negatively relative to our goal of feeling sustainably better. That if we can predict the future, i.e., if we can discern which of the paths lead to the future that is sustainably better, and away from the path of thinking, feeling, acting, and speaking, away from the identity that feels chronically bad, that it's more fun, which is feeling better. So we want to feel sustainably better. And so we want to understand how our choices, how our interactions with the probability field, with the possibility field, affect that goal, which is measured in sustainable well-being versus chronic suffering. So that's why perceiving reality matters. Because if I understand that stoves burn things, and I understand that my finger is a thing, and I understand that burning is painful, and I understand that pain is not moving me towards sustainable well-being, then I'm not going to touch the stove with my hand, or at least not the flame. And if, on the other hand, I understand that eating organic food sustainably produced leads to feeling sustainably better over time, I'm going to do that. But I need a map of reality in order to make an effective decision relative to my goal, which in this case is everyone's goal. Every single human being in the history of the species has wanted to feel better sustainably and wanted to avoid feeling chronically worse. Now, the goal then is reality perception. And one of the things we have, of course, 5 physical senses to perceive reality, at least to perceive the outer physical reality. And so we have eyes and ears and touch. And when you combine these goals, when you observe reality on multiple dimensions, the dimension of sight, the dimension of sound, the dimension of smell, the dimension of sensation, the dimension of taste, when you can observe reality from multiple vectors simultaneously, by observing it on multiple dimensions simultaneously, you get a clearer perspective. It's one of the reasons we have 2 ears and 2 eyes. If you just have one eye, you can see almost everything because the other eye is only 4 inches away. But one of the things that comes stronger into focus is depth perception. Depth perception is a function of synchronizing and correlating the slightly different realities perceived by eyes in slightly different positions. Now, if my eye, or if my eyes were separated in space so that one eye was in Tokyo and one eye was in San Francisco, there would be little correlation. One eye would be saying, these people all look like this, the signs say this, and the other eye would be saying, no, that's not reality at all. What's going on here is there's a sunny beach and Golden Gate Bridge and this, and these two eyes would be in disagreement about what reality was. And the brain, being what it is, would have a hard time reconciling the fact that both of these realities are real, and would be confused. But one of the things that you would have to agree is that you'd have greater perception of reality because you'd be seeing more of the planet than if you just have two eyes a few inches apart. In other words, the wider the distance in perception, the more of reality is captured. So we capture a slice with these two eyes, but that slice still allows us to see the dimension of depth. Depth perception emerges in the tension of difference. When two eyes both seeing part of reality a little differently engage with reality, something emerges in the tension between the difference in perspective. Now, the same, of course, is true in mental difference. When you deal with a person of this political party and a person of this political party, it's as if one is in Tokyo and one is in San Francisco. So they see very different worlds looking at very different data sets. Scientists tell us that we tune out at least 50% of our sensory data. So if you're looking at reality, and I'm looking at reality, and each of us are deleting 50% of it, it's perfectly possible to see the exact opposite things, or to see things that the other person doesn't see. Because if you're tuning out the color red and I'm tuning out the color blue, we're going to disagree on the color system. If you're tuning out allowing and I'm tuning out causing as the generative factor in reality creation, because truly so, you could create reality by causing it or allowing it. So this is a polarity, the feminine aspect to allow, to open, just to let go. The masculine polarity or pole of initiation, of creation, of causation. And both are required for reality to exist. If you have a force pushing, but you do not allow it to pass through, you don't get pass through. You see, if this allows this to pass through, you have pass through even without the push. For this finger to go here, this has to push, and this has to allow it, or it doesn't happen. So for something to happen, there is a participation on the polarity of allowing. Every single aspect of reality has stood by and said, okay, that's fine with me. The gravitational force, the strong and weak force, atoms, the past, the future, they've all said, that's fine. We're going to allow this to exist in this world. And so it does. On the other hand, you could say nothing happens without cause. And so if I tune out that allowing matters, which is half of reality creation, and I say, no, there's no allowing. For anything to happen, it has to be caused. Well, I just delete the part that the entire universe is standing by and allowing something. And I just focus on, no, this one person created it. They caused it. They struck a match and lit this, and they did it. So I'm focusing on cause, and I'm focusing on allowing. Well, the culture, of course, being somewhat overemphasized in masculine territory, emphasizes masculine causation, which is the one who did it, who set things in motion. They caused it all. And no one who allowed it had anything to do with it. But you could also say, no. The entirety of the universe is responsible for this, because the entirety of the universe stood by natural laws. God got us all that is. Everything just stood by and allowed this to happen. One puny little item in the universe couldn't cause all of that. There had to be collaboration. There had to be participation. There were accomplices in feminine terrain. Now, depth perception comes when you look at reality from multiple different perspectives and multiple dimensions. And while we only have 5 physical senses, we also have conscious thought. Now, conscious thought works through the vehicle of language. And there are many languages. Amongst the languages we have is the language of geometry. And the reason we have different observing and measuring devices is that each thing observes and measures something different and reveals something about reality that could not be revealed in another way. I may smell a cake. I may touch a cake. I may taste a cake. But there are parts of the cake that can only be revealed on the dimension of sight. So when I see the cake, by opening my eyes, I see its color. I see whether there's any mold on the cake. I see how big it is. I get a little bit of a sense of its texture. I see its exact location in relationship with other objects. I see if it's sitting in mud or on a nice plate. I see a lot of things that allow me to perceive and anticipate whether eating this cake is going to be good for me. Now, if I look at the ingredients and read those that were in the cake, I see even more through the process of thought and language. Geometry reveals certain faces of reality that we don't see in other areas. And one of the things that it reveals is in the domain of system theory. Now, what's system theory? Well, why do we feel that we are separate from anything else? A scientist will tell you that there are multiple ways on multiple dimensions in which we are connected to every other thing in the universe. And it's not hard to do. If we say that I'm me and I'm independent, then let's examine that, because how am I maintaining my independence, my me-ness? Well, if you've noticed, I've been breathing. And what have I been breathing? I've been breathing oxygen. And where does that come from? Well, it comes from all the trees around. So I'm connected with my ecology via breath. Now, we know we're connected because if we stop breathing, we die. But you haven't seen it yet, but what about when I drink? That's also a relationship. What about when I defecate? Where does that go? Does it just vanish? No, it goes into the environment, hopefully becoming a nutrient for the trees that give oxygen to me. And that's just a few of the literally millions of connections. Meaning we have millions of connections with our ecology. And we're not aware of most of them. We're not aware that the gravitational force that holds this thing in place also holds this thing in place. That if the gravitational force changed for this atom over here, because it's a constant, it would change over here too. And suddenly our bodies wouldn't exist because we are supported by gravity. So there's a lot of interconnectivity in the reality of reality. There's a tremendous amount of interdependence as we connect with the reality of all that is. And so you could say that we are one great seamless ecology. That one thing creates another thing that 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 relates to this thing and this thing. And it's all interconnected, and that's true. It's all one. And that's true as well. So that's the feminine or yin polarity of perception. Everything is one giant equation. And certainly, if you do an energy equation of the universe, you're part of it. Every other thing is part of it as well. So you don't get to have any part of the universe change without changing the energy equation. Like moving this up changed the energy equation. Energy that was in my brain and in my muscle moved to another part of the brain and into another part of my body. The equation changed. Every time I engage with reality, the equation changes. Now, this is profound, and it's somewhat the antithesis of Western culture, which bifurcates, chops up, compartmentalizes, and cuts apart reality through language. So we separate reality through language. Now, how do we do that? This is an integrated system that is part of an integrated system that is part of an integrated system that is part of an integrated system. This finger doesn't exist without this hand. But we pretend it does. How do we do that? We create language. We say this is a finger and this is not a finger. Okay, we've just created the idea of existence separate from the ecology of which it is a part. We've created words that have the supposition that the finger is distinct from the hand. But of course it's not. Because if it was really distinct from the hand, then it could exist without the hand. But as soon as we cut this finger off, it is no longer a finger. If we say that a finger is something that moves like this and is warm at 98 degrees and blah, 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 whatever it is we define a finger as, well, as soon as you cut it off, it's not that. But does it vanish? No. All energy is neither created or destroyed. It simply is transformed. It becomes a different part of the energy equation of which we are all connected. And so nothing is really as distinct as it appears. So if we pretend that this thing is completely separate from this thing, we don't have an accurate version of reality. If we cut off this finger, let's say this finger is jealous of this finger. So this finger cuts off this finger. Well, might this finger die if the body bleeds to death? And might this finger not be cutting off a part of itself? Well, this is an area that's fairly profound in understanding the nature of reality. Meaning, if we think that things are separate and disconnected, but they're actually not, this finger might cut off this finger and not understand what it was doing. And so, in that goal of sustainably feeling better and avoiding feeling chronically bad, there is a failure due to a failed model of reality. So one version, one face of reality is unity. And the benefit of unity as a face in this goal of feeling sustainably better and avoiding feeling chronically bad is that, as a general rule, if you go around destroying and killing things with no respect, with no understanding of its interconnection with everything else, as a general rule, you will increase chronic suffering, not increase sustainable well-being. Because reality is interconnected. If I release the coronavirus as a piece of viral warfare in this country, well, reality is interconnected. So what happens when my countryman comes home with the virus and it spreads in my country? We didn't anticipate that. Why? Because we saw them as two separate countries. We didn't see them as part of a global ecology. So there are escalations in chronic and unnecessary suffering by not perceiving the reality of unity. Now, in geometry, which is one dimension, obviously created with thought and language, it's one dimension. The unity polarity, or the unity pole in the duality between unity and distinction, is represented by the sphere. And when we understand that the sphere, which is the feminine face of geometry, curves in the polarity between straight lines and curves, curves are feminine. Straight lines are masculine. In the polarity between the circle and the point, the circle is feminine, the point is masculine. In the polarity, as we take it into a social dimension, between the individual and the community, the individual is masculine, the community is feminine. So, the sphere is the symbol of unity, of oneness, of yin, and is the feminine pole of reality. Now, one of the things that's valuable to notice about the sphere is that it is the most elegant shape in geometry. Now, elegance in its scientific references refers to the fact that it's very similar to grace. Elegance is the efficiency of transforming energy. And so if you think of a car as a vehicle to transform location and energy, it's a transportation vehicle. So we're porting energy from this area of reality over to this area of reality. And of course, every single aspect of matter exists on the geometrical dimension. So what geometrical shape do we use for wheels? Well, we use round. We use a feminine shape. And the reason is that it transfers energy with less friction than any other shape. We could use triangular wheels or square wheels, but it would be much more energy consumptive. So the feminine shape, the sphere, the interconnected ecology, is elegant, it's graceful. There's less friction. There's less violence, there's less violation when exploring and encountering reality through the feminine polarity. Now, I'm not talking male and female at this level. Wheels are not male or female. Men don't enjoy triangular wheels any more than women do. But we're talking about the feminine polarity, the yin polarity. Now, what's the problem with yin? What's the problem with feminine? What's the problem with the interconnected whole? Well, one of the problems is unconsciousness. Why? If you say, tell me all about reality, and I say, here it is. This is everything. This sphere, that's it. We're all one interconnected sphere. Period. There's nothing but oneness. There's nothing but this sphere. You're a part of it, and so is everything else. That's it. Done. There's reality for you. Now, how conscious are you of reality through that lens? Now, it's very graceful, it's very simple, it's very elegant, but it's completely unconscious. You're one, I'm one, the tree's one, it's all one. There's no distinction. Now, language is the vehicle of creating distinction, because we've already established that we're really not that separate from the tree. If I'm fertilizing the tree with my fecal matter, and the tree is keeping me alive with oxygen, can we really say that there's no connection between us? So why are we any different? See, words break things down and create consciousness. They don't always repair the unity that they break down. So we're one with the tree through breath, through fecal matter, through allowing. Human beings can cut trees down. If the tree exists, it means a lot of humans have allowed it to exist. Now, a lot of trees have allowed humans to exist, producing oxygen, etc. So language takes the circle, takes the one, and slices it up into as many pieces as you have vocabulary. Take the word snow, white powdery stuff. Well, that's good enough for you and me. But the Eskimos have up to 400 words for snow, meaning they've taken white, cold stuff and they've sliced it into 400 different distinctions. Now, why? Why did they slice snow into 400 distinctions where we just left it as snow? Well, every human being has a hierarchy of human needs. Survival is the first one. Security of survival is the second. Now, if you live in 40-degree below zero temperatures, surrounded by white cold stuff, then your survival, if you're going out on a 4-hour journey, let's say you're going to go visit Uncle Harry, who's 4 hours away, through a lot of this white cold stuff. Well, it makes a difference whether this is snow that has thawed and froze again and is moving towards thaw over the next 4 hours, than whether it has not thawed and is moving towards thaw in the next 4 hours, or whether it has thawed and is moving towards ice in the next 4 hours. This will determine the speed of your sleigh, which may determine how many dogs you need to go out on the sleigh. And so the 400 different words for snow are words designed to allow an Eskimo to predict the future based on the science of snow, of water and ice, which they break down into 400 different distinctions. Because the difference between new powder with snow falling as we speak and ice on a clear blue sky that's covering the first top inch of 3 feet of snow, which you can ride a sleigh on, the difference between those two is life and death. So you certainly want that one. And while you're at it, why not invent 398 more distinctions that will allow you to predict the weather that determines your survival and security? And so we break reality into fragments to allow us to better understand reality that we're not fully in the presence of, and to better predict reality. Why? So that we can feel chronically better and avoid feeling chronically worse by breaking down patterns. By saying, every time this big guy comes around and glares at me in the dark alley, I get raped. Well, rape's just a word. This happens, this happens, this happens. But I feel worse after that. So now, big guy, skin like this, nose like this, now I know I need to avoid that pattern, because then I feel chronically worse, and I want to feel chronically better. When I go out into the snow, when it's rising temperatures and it's 3 feet deep and like this, people in my tribe die. And when they die, I have to do their chores, because someone's got to do all the chores that the other tribe members used to do, and this and that. So my suffering goes up. I used to make jokes with that person, and they're dead now, so I can't. So my sense of humor goes down, which was one of the things that made me feel sustainably better. So I don't want this person to die in my tribe, and I don't want to die. And so we're not going to go out on a 4-hour adventure in this type of snow. We're only going to go out in this type of snow. So the benefit of distinction is awareness. Now, in this case, we're using language to create awareness out of nothing. Meaning, if I just say we're all one, okay, you have that awareness. We are all one. Okay. You have no awareness of 3 feet of powder or not. Because 3 feet of powder is 1, and 1 foot of powder is 1. And you're 1, and I'm 1. So there's no awareness of gender. The falling from the kingdom of heaven, the oneness, into the knowledge of good and evil. We're talking about the fall from the sphere into the system, because every face of language is and forms a system of thought. You see, you cannot think a thought without the words that create the thought. If you want to test that hypothesis, try to think a thought without language. There's nothing there. Now, you can look at reality and not conjure any words, but you have no idea what you're looking at. Even the idea of looking at reality is a thought created by the word look. Who knew? All human consciousness is predicated on distinctions which are formed in the system of language. Now, every system breaks the sphere down in a different way. Every system is different, and its difference comes down to how it breaks down the sphere. So, for example, if I take the sphere and I break it down like this, that's one system. Now, to see the system, I've got to call this a sphere. That's a word. And then I've got to call these, what do I call them? Lines? Refractions? Interruptions? Anyway, let's call these perpendicular lines. So my system is the sphere interrupted with perpendicular lines. Okay, so what? It's not a very good system. What's it for? Well, let's invent another system through language. Let's call this perpendicular line 1. Let's call this one 2. Let's call this one 3. And let's create a system of mathematics through language that says the one that's closest to us is 1, and the next distinct pattern, in this case perpendicular lines, will be 2 and 3. Well, how does this system work? Are we just going to have infinite systems? Are we going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, Quan, Bing, Song, Hing, Hong? Are we just going to go on infinitely, creating a new word for every single number? Oh gosh, that's hard to remember, right? Well, the human brain has a hard time remembering more than 9 things. I know, let's create a 10-point number system. Let's go to 9, and then rather than make up some more words, we'll repeat it. We'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then we'll go back to 1. 10, 11, 12. We'll go back to 1 because, that's so much easier to remember. We don't have to write endless characters, because if we had 300 million different characters, you might forget, like, is that 300, because we all know these symbols, because there's not too many of them. What if there was a symbol that said like that, and then another one that said like this, and this is symbol 391, and this is symbol 392? Like, oh gosh, which is it? What if you pay someone $1 million for a piece of coffee because you typed in the wrong number? It's terrible. So we'll just repeat. At what? At our capacity to remember symbols, which, if you try and remember a random number more than 9, it's pretty hard, let alone thousands of them. And so we create a 9 or a 10-based number system. Go up to 9 and repeat. They go up to 19 and repeat. Go up to 30 and repeat. And so that's our system. Now, systems are useful. Doing mathematical calculations. Let's see. I have $35,000 in my pocket, and when I add up all the materials for the house that I'm building, they come up to $96,000 in materials. And I've got $35,000 in my pocket, and I'm making $8 an hour. I'm going to run out of money long before I run out of house. So what am I going to do? It allows us to predict the future and then think, how am I going to respond? And in responding, making a choice that leads towards more well-being. So the benefit of looking through the masculine lens of reality of systems is that it makes things conscious. And the more conscious patterns are, the more conscious predictions are. And the more conscious predictions are, the more consciously we make choices in order to predict a positive future. So that's the reason to have systems. Now, the problem with a system is that it's never complete. So let's take this nice little system here. Looks a little bit like a clock. Well, we have 1 and we have 2. But what about all this space in between? That's unconscious, isn't it? Well, we can say it's space, but okay, let's make it a little more conscious. We'll make the system more complex. So we take here and we say 1.5. But what about all this space? Okay, we'll do quarters. We'll do inches, 1 inch, and then we'll have a half inch, and then we'll have quarter inch. Well, what about eighths of an inch? Okay, that's good. We're getting a little bit closer. Now, notice the more nuance we have, the more we can predict the future. When you're dealing with a piston in a car engine, an eighth of an inch is not going to cut it. If you design the piston housing and the piston within an eighth of an inch accuracy, you are screwed. What if the piston is an eighth of an inch bigger than the piston housing? Well, you certainly don't get the combustion engine. You don't get anything at all. You try and insert it, it doesn't fit, and it's like you feel pretty bad if you spent all that time making a piston and it doesn't fit. So then you get more accurate, right? You come down to 32 seconds of an inch, and you ding, 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 ding. You get it really tiny. But what about a 64th of an inch? What about a millionth of an inch? What about a billionth of an inch? What about 10 trillion to the 10th power of an inch? Oh, I can't see that. You've lost me. There is an infinite amount of space in between any 2 points. So you divide space through geometry. You divide the sphere through geometry at increments of refinement, at increments of consciousness that are relevant to your experience of reality. But reality is infinite. Space is infinite. Well, one of the things this means is that the vast amount of reality is unconscious. Take the color spectrum, a nice sphere. All the colors that could possibly exist are in the possibility field. of the spherical color wheel. You have the sphere. Very nice. Now, if you have no language for color, it's just color. But you don't have a language for color, so it's just reality. It's just one with everything else. But let's say you add in the word color. All these different somethings are color. You see, that's a little different than that. What? How is it different? Well, that's a little brighter. That's a little darker. Oh, so you have to introduce the word bright and dark. That's a little more red. So what's red? Well, that's this stuff. What's yellow? That's okay. Oh, that's more red. Yes, I see that. So this color, is it more red or less red than this? Well, it's more red. And what does red do? What does red mean in the system of symbols that we're using to color chart something? Well, we're inventing consciousness. Now, a computer will refract the color spectrum into 256 million colors. So what? We can't tell the difference between, let's say, rather than 256 million, we were looking at 256 different colors. Could we easily spot the difference between 255 and 256? It's getting a bit subtle. Fine, let's just have 7 colors. But a computer speaks in a language of 256 million colors, which would be burdensome to us because we're not that picky. Now, a color artist, a specialist, etc., that comes out to advise us on picking house colors will be more specialized than we are. They'll talk in a series of distinctions. They'll use a series of words that bring things into consciousness that we were not aware of. They'll talk about the distinction of warm colors and cool colors. They'll talk about the distinctions in the fashion trends. Warm taupes are popular these days. Vanilla whites and these things are the new trend, whatever. So they'll bring in a series of distinctions. Why? To help you predict the future. What are they trying to predict there? How cool your friends think you are when they walk into your house, right? So if you get all these colors just right, then when the average person walks into their house, if they're intelligent enough to grasp it, right? Because when the problem with cult thinking is first one part of the cult has to tell you what's cool, and then another part of the cult has to tell all these people what's cool so that they'll know that what you've done is cool. And then you need to know that it's cool, or you've just spent a lot of money for nothing. So you've got to be told by the professional that doing this is the cool thing to do. And then all these other people have to be educated by other parts of the cult to say that that's the cool thing to do so that they'll know you're cool. Because wouldn't it be a pity that you're the only one who knew how cool you were? Because you did all the expert color specialist advice, but all your friends were so uneducated. They were so uncult indoctrinated that they didn't know that that was the warm taupe that Jennifer Aniston, who's that? Well, you see, they didn't watch the right shows to know that they didn't watch the right shows to know that Jennifer Aniston was cool. So that it didn't matter to them that Jennifer Aniston hired the best color specialist and that she had these colors in her living room. Oh, my goodness, I went to all this money to create the best and most cool living room, and you didn't even know who Jennifer Aniston was. You didn't know that there was color specialists. You don't know how much it costs, so you don't know how rich I am. You don't know that money is important, that defines value, so you don't realize how valuable I am to be able to spend this money. So frustrating. So for these cult memes to go around, you can't just climb the cult ranking system. The cult has to indoctrinate all these other people around you so that they know that all that hard work that you've done has made you more important than other people. And then it's got to teach them, okay, you're more important than other people, so what? Well, it's got to teach, well, you have to do things for me because I'm more important. well, what do we have to do? Well, you have to do like this and like this. And then you have to pretend that you're not doing it because, otherwise you're a shill. Well, what's a shill? Well, it's this. It's like, oh, my goodness. So cults are very complicated. And the infinite space that is between any 2 points in a system is infinite. You can take this distance and you can refract it once, a unit of measurement. You can refract this space. You can break it up 10 trillion times, and there is still half of that, and half of that, and half of that, and half of that. At some point, it becomes meaningless to our bodies, which are happening at this scale. And so stuff at this micro scale, we don't understand how it relates to us. Well, of course, it relates to us in all manner of ways, since every part of our body has subatomic particles operating at that scale, but we don't see them. We don't talk to them. They're not showing up in our observing and measuring devices, so we just ignore them. The benefit of a system is that it creates consciousness. It creates a system. It creates a pattern. And the benefit of a pattern is it allows us to predict the outcome of a pattern. I predict, says a watercolorist, says a veil painter, I predict that when I do a yellow veil on this paper and then do a blue veil on this paper, that the overlapping sections of blue and yellow are going to turn green. Well, what's green? Well, it's this shade of density and hue, and then we just call it green in English. And there's this other system of chopping reality up into bits. It's called Japanese. And they have different letters, different sounds, and they don't chop reality up exactly the way we do. What? No. See, they took this shade of green and this shade of green, and they made this shade of green that was in the middle. They didn't follow our system. What? Our system wasn't the best system in the history of the world to be invented? My goodness. And so they divided reality into another system. So now it has to be translated from one system to another system. Otherwise, we don't understand it. And if we don't understand it, we can't predict the future. And if we can't predict the future in relationship to our behavior, then we can't do the things that'll make us feel better. If I can't do the things that'll make me feel better, I'll feel chronically worse and won't feel sustainably better. I'll fail at my primary drive as a living being to feel sustainably better. Now, of course, as we move back to grace, as we move back to the sphere, as we move back to unity, we feel better. A wheel, a sphere, is the most elegant shape in the universe. As we move towards feminine terrain, we feel better. But if we lack all masculine context, we don't know that we feel better because we don't have any distinction between feeling better or worse. We don't have any memory because time is a distinction. This could be infinite space. There is infinite time between 1 second and another second. There's infinite time between 1 hour and another hour. You can slice time down to the 10th trillion of the 10th trillion power in the gap between 1 second, if you have the observing and measuring devices to do it. So, if there's no time, well, one of the things that happens is there's no fear. Because all fear is pain in the past projected into the future that we don't want to feel. I don't want to feel the pain in the past in the future. So if I was hit when I ate a cookie without permission before, and I've just eaten a cookie without permission, and the same people who hit me are around, and they have the same detection device, right? They count the cookies. And they have the same system of who they believe. They never believe me. Okay. So the system is in place to make sure that I'm guilty of taking the cookie without permission. The same people who hit me before are going to do the counting. I've just eaten a cookie. I predict that there's a good chance I'm going to be hit. And wait a minute, I remember, I put the past back together again in my brain. And I say, boy, that didn't feel good. Oh my goodness, I'm a human being. I want to feel sustainably good, and I want to avoid feeling chronically bad. But hitting feels bad. What am I going to do? Oh, I'm scared. I'm scared. It's coming, it's coming. Oh, they're counting the cookies. What am I going to do? I'm scared. Because I have the past, the present, and I think I know what's coming. Fear is pain in the past projected into the future. But what if you don't have any language for past, present, and future? What if you have no consciousness of past, present, and future? Well, there's no fear. Well, is there pain? What is pain? It's separation from and longing for. I want this to be happening, but this is happening. That's what pain is. I want to be a whole body, but this part of my arm is laying over there. I want wholeness, but I am separate. This laying over there bit of my arm is not whole. It's separate. So pain is the separation from and longing for. I want love and connection. Instead, I'm hated. Oh, I'm separate from what I long for. I want to be having sex right now. Instead, I'm alone, eating potato chips to avoid feeling my lonely feelings. And I don't want to be eating potato chips, so I want to be slim and healthy. But I'm separate from that slim and healthy because I'm doing the things that make me fat and greasy. Oh, so many areas of pain, so many separations and longings. I want to be this, but I'm doing this that's creating this. I want this, but this is happening, and this is, there's so much pain. And I don't want to feel pain in the future. But I didn't know how to solve it in the past. So there it is, waiting for me. I don't want to face the day. I want people to look at me and say how hot and cool I am, but instead they laugh and ignore me. Oh, I feel pain about that. I want to feel alive and healthy, but I feel depressed and tired. Oh, another source of pain. Well, if there's no language, if there is no distinction, if there is no cool, if there is no good and bad, if there is no knowledge of good and evil, is there any fear? Is there any pain? Is there any time? Is there any space? Because what is space? It's the distance between 2 points. Well, if the 2 points don't exist because you don't have the language to create them, is there any space? Is there a difference between yin and yang? You know, the Chinese, it is just a system after all of dividing the circle. They do this interesting thing of these 2 points. That within the center of the yin is the yang, and within the center of the yang is the yin. That one cannot exist without the other. That half of the circle cannot exist without the other half. That half of the body cannot exist without the other half. If you cut the planet in half, it doesn't exist as a planet. The orbits get thrown off, the Earth becomes too volatile, all the animals die, all the plants die. It's a very different thing when you cut the Earth in half. What about the universe? Could you cut the universe in half and have half of the universe function without the other half? What about a turtle? Could you cut a turtle in half and have it function without the other half of the turtle? It's like, no, that doesn't work. So this half is an illusion. It doesn't exist without the other half. Could you grow half of an orange tree? Now, this little dot in here is kind of an acknowledgement that you cannot have a system to refract reality without a reality to refract. You cannot demark space without space being there. You cannot experience space without something to demark the space. So if you say that the demarcation is masculine and the space in between is feminine, well, how do you get space? You have to have two demarcations. You need the masculine to create the feminine. But if there's no space to demark, you can't have masculine. So you need the feminine to allow the masculine. Well, it gets pretty biologically basic as a human being. You don't get a child without a mother. You don't get a child without a father. It takes polarity to give birth to something whole, to something that exists. So, all these distinctions are not real, but they create awareness within the human brain that is more real than no awareness. So, you have some movement. You have some movement between unconscious totality, the vast, endless stretch of oneness, into polarity and consciousness through language. Now we're into systems. All consciousness is a system. A system designed through language, be it mathematical language, verbal language, written language. It is a language of thought. How do you get it? Well, you just create a symbol for some face of reality. Now, in early days, or if you are speaking with someone who's Japanese, what's that? Well, we've probably think of a tree. Why? Is that a tree? No. Is that soil? No. Are those needles? No. Do they smell of pine needles? No. Why is it a tree? Well, we're looking at a symbol, a heuristic representation of reality through shape. A tree does have a main stem, and in about those sense of scales, a pine tree, a Christmas tree, which is an archetype in Western culture, goes down. Well, what about all those trees that go up? Well, that's not how we learned the symbol of tree. We learned that the symbol of tree was this. So it's not too hard to say that rather than go out and point at a tree. Now, why do we invent symbols? Because they're efficient. You could say that intelligence is measured by the efficiency of transforming energy into human well-being. And so if you transform energy into human well-being more efficient than you did before, you're growing in intelligence. Why? Because every human being wants to feel sustainably good and wants to avoid feeling chronically bad. And you've just succeeded at spending less energy to feel better. Which means you've grown. In what? In intelligence, in pattern recognition, in efficiency, in grace. Which means you're moving back towards the sphere, the most graceful shape, the most feminine shape in the universe. So let's tighten this up a little bit just for for fun, for whatever. And look at systems here. Now here you have a 3-point system. So in this system of the universe, there are only 3 words. Let's say 1, 2, and 3. So it's a pretty simple system. So you've got 3 dimensions of consciousness, 1, 2, and 3. So the entirety of the whole is refracted into 3 faces. Now they could be very close, meaning the circle could be a triangle like this. So one of the things in systems and the system of consciousness is how... Actually, this is too much fun to rush, and I need to attend to a few things. So this is too much fun to rush, so why don't we just pause here, and we'll do part 2 later.